The moment King Charles III is gone, everything changes, but not in the way most people expect. Because when Prince William becomes king, it doesn't just shift titles. It rewrites reality itself. Power, identity, control. 30 transformations begin instantly, and some of them are far more unsettling than anyone is prepared for. It doesn't begin with a ceremony, and it doesn't wait for the world to catch up emotionally, because the transformation that turns Prince William into king is not symbolic, it is immediate, absolute, and deeply embedded in a constitutional system that has been designed for centuries to eliminate uncertainty the very second a monarch dies, which means that while the public imagines a gradual transition marked by mourning, processions, and coronation rituals, the reality is far colder and far more precise, because the exact moment King Charles III takes his final breath, the entire structure of authority shifts without pause, without confirmation, and without any visible signal to the outside world. And in that single second, William is no longer operating as an individual within the system but becomes the system itself. A transformation so complete that it redefines not just his role but his legal existence, his responsibilities, and even the way the law perceives him, because, under long-standing constitutional principles, the monarch is not simply a person with power but the source from which that power flows, which creates a reality that feels almost impossible in a modern democratic context, because while everyone else exists under the law, the sovereign exists as the foundation of it, and that distinction carries consequences that extend into every aspect of life, from governance to personal accountability, because the concept often summarized as "the king can do no wrong" is not a slogan but a legal doctrine that effectively places the monarch outside the normal mechanisms of prosecution, meaning that the system cannot try, arrest, or compel the sovereign in the same way it would any other citizen. And while in practice this power is never exercised in a reckless or visible way, its existence defines the boundary between the monarch and the rest of society, creating a level of separation that is both protective and restrictive at the same time, because with that immunity comes a different kind of limitation, one that removes the ability to act as a private individual, express political opinions, or participate in the democratic processes that govern everyone else. And this is where the paradox of kingship becomes impossible to ignore, because in gaining absolute legal standing, William simultaneously loses personal freedom, becoming bound to a framework of neutrality that dictates how he speaks, what he supports, and even what he is allowed to publicly believe. And that shift is reinforced immediately through the responsibilities that transfer with the crown, because every official action of the state, from the approval of legislation to the formal appointment of government leaders, now carries his authority, even if those decisions are shaped by elected officials. And this creates a dynamic where power exists in form as much as in function, because the monarch's role is not to govern directly but to legitimize the system that does, acting as the final constitutional checkpoint that ensures continuity, stability, and legitimacy across transitions of power. And while this may appear ceremonial on the surface, it carries a weight that becomes most visible in moments of crisis, when the theoretical powers of the crown, often referred to as royal prerogatives, can influence outcomes in ways that are rarely discussed publicly but remain embedded within the structure of governance. And this is where the transformation becomes more than just a change in title, because it places William at the intersection of tradition and modernity, where centuries-old authority must coexist with contemporary expectations of transparency and accountability, and that tension shapes every aspect of his role from the very beginning. Because even as he inherits immense symbolic and constitutional power, he must exercise it with restraint, aware that the survival of the monarchy depends not on the extent of its authority but on the perception of its legitimacy, and that perception is reinforced through every action, every appearance, and every decision made under his name, creating a continuous balancing act between visibility and neutrality, influence and restraint, power and responsibility, and this balancing act extends beyond governance into the smallest details of daily life. Because the moment he becomes king, the systems that once operated around him begin to reconfigure, from security protocols to travel arrangements, from communication channels to administrative structures, all aligning with the requirements of his new position, and even aspects that seem ordinary, such as identification, documentation, and procedural formalities, are redefined by the fact that the monarch exists as the issuer rather than the recipient of authority, which means that certain requirements applied to others no longer apply in the same way, reinforcing the distinction between the sovereign and the citizen. And this distinction is not merely practical, it is symbolic, representing the continuity of an institution that has evolved over centuries while maintaining its core structure. And as this transformation unfolds in real time, it becomes clear that what appears from the outside as a moment of transition is, in reality, a complete reconstruction of identity, one that replaces the individual with the role, the private with the public, and the temporary with the enduring. and once that reconstruction is complete, it sets the foundation for everything that follows, because every subsequent change, whether financial, political, or personal, is built upon this initial shift, which raises a question that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore, because if the very nature of existence can be redefined in a single second, then what other transformations are set in motion at that exact same moment? And more importantly, how far do those changes extend beyond what the public can actually see? Because as significant as this legal and constitutional shift may be, it is only the first layer of a much larger transformation that is just beginning to unfold. As that legal and constitutional transformation settles into place, the next shift begins to unfold in a way that feels less abstract and far more tangible, because beyond authority and identity, there is an immediate and unavoidable restructuring of wealth, control, and financial flow that activates the second Prince William becomes king, and unlike the visible rituals the public associates with royal change, this financial transition happens silently, automatically, and with a level of precision that reveals just how deeply the monarchy is embedded within a complex system of estates, trusts, and constitutional arrangements. Because for years William has operated within a framework where his income, lifestyle, and operational capacity were largely supported by the Duchy of Cornwall, a vast estate specifically designed to fund the heir to the throne, generating tens of millions annually through land, property, and commercial ventures. But the moment he ascends, that entire structure detaches from him instantly, not gradually, not symbolically, but completely, transferring directly to his eldest son, which means that in the same second William becomes one of the most powerful figures in the world, he simultaneously loses the primary source of personal income that sustained his previous life, creating a paradox where increased authority is paired with a reconfiguration of financial independence. And this is where the system reveals one of its most fascinating dynamics, because while the Duchy of Cornwall leaves his control, another, far larger structure comes into focus: the Crown Estate, a multi-billion-pound portfolio that includes some of the most valuable land and assets in the United Kingdom, from prime urban properties to offshore resources. Yet despite its immense value, it does not function as personal wealth in the conventional sense, because the monarch does not own it in a private capacity, cannot sell it, and cannot use it as collateral. Instead, its profits are directed to the government, which then returns a portion through what is known as the sovereign grant, funding official duties and the operational needs of the monarchy. And this creates a system where wealth exists, but control over that wealth is structured, monitored, and inherently tied to public accountability, meaning that every expenditure, every renovation, and every allocation becomes part of a broader national conversation, transforming financial management from a private matter into a public responsibility. And this shift is reinforced by the Duchy of Lancaster, another significant estate that provides income to the sovereign, yet operates under similar principles of stewardship rather than unrestricted ownership, emphasizing that the role of king is not about personal enrichment but about managing assets that are historically and constitutionally linked to the institution itself. And this distinction becomes even more critical when considering inheritance, because unlike private citizens who face substantial taxation on large estates, the transfer of assets from one sovereign to the next is structured to preserve continuity, allowing core holdings such as private estates, collections, and certain assets to pass without the same level of financial depletion, ensuring that the monarchy maintains its structural stability across generations. And while this arrangement often sparks debate, it highlights the unique position of the crown as both a historical institution and a modern entity that must balance tradition with public perception, which is why recent monarchs, including William's predecessors, have chosen to voluntarily engage with tax systems on private income, recognizing that legitimacy in the modern era depends not just on legal frameworks but on public trust. And this is where the financial transformation becomes more than a technical adjustment, because it reshapes the way the monarch interacts with wealth, turning it into a tool of diplomacy, influence, and representation rather than personal use. And as this new framework takes hold, it introduces a level of scrutiny that did not exist in the same way before, because every financial decision now carries symbolic weight, reflecting not just personal preference but institutional priorities. And this creates a continuous balancing act between maintaining the grandeur associated with the monarchy and demonstrating fiscal responsibility in a world that increasingly questions inherited privilege. And that balance extends into how resources are allocated across the royal family, because funding is no longer distributed purely through tradition, but through a system that aligns with the strategic direction of the monarchy under its new leadership, meaning that roles, responsibilities, and even visibility can be influenced by how resources are structured and assigned. And as this process unfolds, it becomes clear that the financial transformation is not just about numbers, it is about control, because whoever directs the flow of resources effectively shapes the functioning of the entire institution, And now that control sits firmly with the new king, reinforcing his position not only as the symbolic head of state but as the central figure through which the monarchy's economic structure operates, and this realization adds another layer to the transition. Because it shows that the change is not limited to titles or ceremonies, it extends into the mechanisms that sustain the institution on a daily basis, influencing everything from operational capacity to strategic direction. And as these mechanisms realign around the new center of authority, they set the stage for further transformations that move beyond finance into areas that are even more visible, even more symbolic, and in many ways even more powerful. Because while wealth defines capability, the next shift defines perception, and that is where the transformation begins to take on an entirely new dimension. As that financial structure settles into a new balance and the flow of resources begins to align around the authority of Prince William, the next transformation moves into a space that is far more visible yet often misunderstood. Because within the monarchy, perception is constructed not only through words or actions but through symbols, imagery, and the controlled presentation of identity. And this is where the shift becomes unmistakable, because the moment a new reign begins, the entire visual language of the institution starts to change, from the portraits that hang in official buildings to the insignia used on state documents, from the currency that circulates in everyday life to the stamps, uniforms, and ceremonial objects that reinforce continuity. And while these changes may appear gradual to the public, they are initiated almost immediately within the system, because the monarchy relies on visual coherence to maintain its authority, ensuring that every representation aligns with the current sovereign. And this creates a ripple effect that extends across multiple layers of society, because the image of the monarch is not confined to palaces or official events. It is embedded in daily life, appearing on coins, banknotes, government materials, and even within institutions that operate far from the center of royal activity. And as these elements begin to update, they signal a transition that is both subtle and pervasive, reinforcing the idea that the system has already moved forward even as the public continues to process the change. And this is where the transformation becomes particularly powerful, because it does not rely on direct statements or announcements. It operates through repetition, gradually replacing one image with another until the new reality feels established. And this process is guided by a long-standing principle within the monarchy that prioritizes continuity while allowing for adaptation, meaning that while the core structure remains intact, its outward expression evolves to reflect the new reign. And this evolution is carefully managed to ensure that it feels natural rather than disruptive, even though the underlying shift is significant, because it involves redefining how the institution is seen both domestically and internationally. And this is where the role of the monarch extends beyond governance into representation, because every appearance, every portrait, and every public moment becomes part of a broader narrative that shapes how the monarchy is perceived in a rapidly changing world. And as Prince William steps into this role, he inherits not just the symbols themselves but the responsibility of maintaining their relevance, which requires a delicate balance between honoring tradition and responding to modern expectations. And this balance is particularly important in an era where visibility is amplified by global media and digital platforms, because the speed at which images circulate means that perception can shift quickly, making it essential for the institution to present a consistent and coherent identity at all times. And this is achieved through a coordinated effort that involves multiple departments, from communications teams to cultural institutions, all working to ensure that the transition is reflected accurately and effectively across every medium. And as this coordination unfolds, it becomes clear that the transformation is not limited to high-profile elements such as currency or official portraits. It extends into smaller but equally significant details, such as the wording of official documents, the design of emblems, and the protocols that govern how the monarch is addressed and represented. And each of these changes contributes to a larger pattern that reinforces the new hierarchy, creating a sense of continuity that masks the scale of the underlying shift. And this is where the psychological dimension becomes particularly interesting, because while the public may not consciously notice every change, the cumulative effect shapes their perception of stability and legitimacy, ensuring that the transition feels seamless even though it represents a complete reconfiguration of authority. And this seamlessness is essential to the survival of the monarchy, because it allows the institution to maintain its presence without drawing attention to the mechanics behind it, creating the impression that the system operates naturally rather than through deliberate design. And as this process continues, it raises an important question about the nature of power itself. Because if authority can be reinforced through imagery and repetition to such an extent, then the distinction between what is seen and what is real becomes increasingly blurred. And this blurring is not accidental, it is part of the structure, ensuring that the monarchy remains both visible and intangible at the same time. And as the new visual language takes hold, it sets the stage for further transformations that move beyond representation into areas that involve direct interaction with governance and decision-making. Because while symbols shape perception, the next layer of change influences how power is exercised within the system, and that is where the transition begins to reveal its full complexity. As the visual identity of the monarchy realigns and the symbols of authority begin to reinforce the presence of the new sovereign, the next transformation moves into the core of governance itself, where the role of Prince William evolves from symbolic representation into a position that is deeply embedded within the functioning of the state. Because while the modern monarchy is often described as ceremonial, the structure that supports it still carries constitutional mechanisms that influence how government operates, and these mechanisms activate instantly the moment the new king assumes his role, creating a dynamic that is both subtle and significant, because although elected officials are responsible for day-to-day governance, their authority is formally exercised in the name of the sovereign, which means that every major action of the state, from legislation to appointments, ultimately passes through a framework that recognizes the monarch as the source of that authority, and this is where the relationship between the king and the government becomes one of the most important aspects of the transition, because it establishes a balance between democratic decision-making and constitutional continuity, and that balance is maintained through a series of established practices that have evolved over time, including the regular interactions between the monarch and the prime minister, which provide a space for discussion, consultation, and reflection that operates outside the public eye, allowing for a level of candid exchange that is rarely possible in more visible political settings. And while these interactions do not involve direct control over policy, they create an environment in which the monarch can offer perspective, raise concerns, and provide continuity based on a long-term view of the nation's history and direction. And this long-term perspective is one of the defining characteristics of the role, because unlike elected officials who operate within fixed terms, the monarch's position extends across decades, allowing for a broader understanding of how decisions made in the present may shape the future. And this perspective becomes particularly relevant in moments of uncertainty or transition, where the stability of the institution can serve as a point of reference for both the government and the public. And this is where the concept of royal prerogative becomes important, because it represents a collection of powers that, while rarely exercised directly by the monarch, remain part of the constitutional framework and can influence how certain decisions are made, including the formal appointment of a prime minister following an election, the opening and closing of parliamentary sessions, and the granting of royal assent to legislation, which is required for laws to take effect. And although these actions are typically carried out in accordance with established conventions, their existence underscores the unique position of the monarch within the system, serving as both a participant in and a safeguard of the constitutional order. And this dual role creates a level of complexity that is not always visible from the outside, because it requires the monarch to navigate a space where influence must be exercised carefully and often indirectly, ensuring that the institution remains neutral while still fulfilling its responsibilities. And this neutrality is one of the most significant changes that comes with the transition, because it imposes strict limitations on what the monarch can publicly express, preventing any direct involvement in political debates or partisan issues. And while this may appear restrictive, it is essential to maintaining the legitimacy of the monarchy, ensuring that it is seen as a unifying presence rather than a divisive one, and this requirement extends into every aspect of public life, shaping how the monarch communicates, engages with different groups, and represents the nation both domestically and internationally. And as this new role takes shape, it also influences how the armed forces relate to the crown, because the monarch holds the position of commander-in-chief, symbolizing the connection between the military and the state, even though operational control remains with the government, and this symbolic leadership carries its own responsibilities, particularly in moments of remembrance and national reflection, where the monarch represents the collective memory of those who have served, reinforcing the bond between the institution and the people. And as these layers of responsibility come together, they create a role that is far more complex than it appears on the surface, because it requires balancing tradition with modern expectations, authority with restraint, and visibility with neutrality, all while maintaining the continuity that defines the monarchy itself. And this balancing act becomes the foundation of the new reign, shaping how the institution operates in a world that is constantly evolving. And as the monarch navigates these challenges, it becomes clear that the transformation is not limited to a single moment but continues to unfold over time, influencing not only the structure of governance but also the way the monarchy is perceived both at home and abroad. And this perception is critical, because it determines how effectively the institution can adapt to changing circumstances while preserving its core identity. And as the new reign begins to establish itself within this complex framework, it sets the stage for the final layer of transformation, one that moves beyond governance and into the broader global context, where the monarchy must engage with an international landscape that is increasingly diverse interconnected, and at times uncertain, raising questions about how its role will evolve in the years to come and what that evolution will mean for its place in the modern world. As the internal structure of governance settles into its new rhythm and the balance between authority and restraint begins to define the early shape of the reign, the final transformation moves beyond the borders of the United Kingdom and into a global landscape that is far more uncertain, far more fluid, and far less predictable than the system the monarchy was originally built to operate within. Because the moment Prince William becomes king, he does not simply inherit a national role, he steps into a network of international relationships that have been shaped over decades, particularly through the Commonwealth, an association of countries that represents a significant portion of the world's population yet operates on principles that are voluntary rather than enforced, which means that his position within that network is not guaranteed in the same way as his position within the United Kingdom. And this creates a situation where the transition of power at home triggers a series of conversations abroad, because while some nations continue to maintain the monarch as their head of state, others are actively reassessing that connection, and this reassessment is influenced by historical context, political priorities, and evolving public opinion, making the new reign a moment of both continuity and potential change on a global scale. And as these discussions unfold, they highlight a key distinction that often goes unnoticed, which is that being king of the United Kingdom does not automatically ensure leadership within the broader Commonwealth, because that role is based on recognition and agreement among member states, requiring the new monarch to engage diplomatically in a way that extends beyond tradition. And this is where the challenge becomes particularly complex, because it involves balancing respect for national sovereignty with a desire to maintain a shared sense of connection. And that balance is further complicated by the fact that many countries are navigating their own identities in a post-colonial world, where the relevance of inherited institutions is being questioned more openly than ever before, and as a result, the transition of power in the monarchy can act as a catalyst for debates about independence, representation, and the future direction of these nations. And this places the new king in a position where his actions, tone, and approach to diplomacy carry significant weight, because they can influence how the monarchy is perceived not just as a historical institution but as a contemporary presence that must justify its role in a rapidly changing environment. And this justification is not achieved through authority alone. It requires engagement, understanding, and a willingness to adapt, which is why the early stages of the reign often involve a shift in how the monarchy presents itself internationally, moving from a model of distant symbolism to one of active participation, where visits, conversations, and collaborations are designed to reinforce relevance while respecting the autonomy of each nation involved. And this approach reflects a broader transformation within the institution, one that recognizes that its future depends not on maintaining past structures unchanged, but on evolving in ways that align with modern expectations. And as this evolution takes place, it also influences how the monarchy is perceived at home, because global relevance and domestic legitimacy are closely linked, with each reinforcing the other in ways that shape public support. And this interconnected dynamic means that decisions made in one context can have ripple effects in another, creating a complex environment in which the monarch must navigate multiple layers of expectation simultaneously. And this complexity is further heightened by the speed at which information and opinion now circulate, because in a digital age, every action, every statement, and every appearance is subject to immediate analysis and interpretation, making consistency and clarity more important than ever before. And as the new reign begins to establish its identity within this landscape, it becomes clear that the transformation is not confined to a single moment or a single place. It extends across borders, across systems, and across perceptions, reshaping the role of the monarchy in ways that will continue to unfold over time. And this ongoing process highlights a fundamental truth about the institution, which is that its survival depends on its ability to adapt while maintaining a sense of continuity, ensuring that it remains both recognizable and relevant in a world that is constantly changing. And as Prince William steps fully into this role, the scale of that responsibility becomes undeniable, because he is not only inheriting a position, he is inheriting a legacy that must be carried forward in a way that resonates with both tradition and modernity, and that challenge defines the beginning of his reign, as much as any ceremony or title, leaving one final question that lingers beyond all the structural changes and symbolic transitions. Because if the monarchy is capable of transforming so completely in a single moment, then what will it become in the years that follow? And how will that transformation shape the future of the institution itself? So now it comes down to you. Do you see this transition as a powerful evolution that keeps the monarchy relevant, or as a system struggling to adapt to a world that is moving beyond it? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep, high-retention breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for what comes next.